Hi ho ho, it's me, Christopher Lee, back at it again with a new episode of the Boy Time Podcast, and as always, I'm joined by Babby and Paul.
I
We have a slam dunk episode, as always. We have week 2 of our Halloween horror movie marathon, and a little bit of a deep dive on the context around it. But other than that, I mean, it's been a pretty slow couple of weeks. I don't have any news in terms of entertainment news that seems to be of note. Seems like the world kind of paused for some reason. It was probably because I was in the sunny state of New Mexico, enjoying all that the state has to offer, like a Breaking Bad tour and going up a mountain. Those were the highlights. That's it. Yeah, the tour I went on was kind of, it was cool because I got to see all the locations, but like the driver was a very nice Italian man named Luigi. Can't make that up. And he was, I guess, a driver for a lot of the like cast members when they were in Albuquerque, making Breaking Bad. He would be driving some people around. And so like we would go to like different locations, then he would pull out like a binder, and there was like, a pretty sizable amount of printed photographs that he had where it's like, this is me and my best friend Bryan Cranston. Hey, this is me and my best friend Aaron Paul. It just kind of went on like that for a while. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like I knew that this was gonna kind of be the vibe of like a celebrity house tour in LA, but I didn't realize how much it was going to be like a celebrity house tour in LA. But it was still kind of cool. I got to see the Walter White house. It was all decorated for Halloween, so that's kind of fun.
Is there a pizza on the roof?
There was not.
Dang it.
There was
That would
not.
have been the perfect Halloween decoration.
You would think. You would think that this lady would have a pizza on her roof. Which, by the way, I had heard so many things about the lady that owns the Breaking Bad house that, she would get really mad at people for, coming to her house and taking pictures of it. Or obviously it's totally justified to get angry at people for throwing pizzas on your roof or breaking into the backyard and like I think there was something about the pool. Something happened there.
Skylar fell in it.
Yeah, Skylar fell in and just didn't swim back up. But yeah,
Oopsie.
a little oopsie. It's fine. But she came out, and while Luigi was driving, she was like, "Hey, Luigi, I haven't seen you in so long. How have you been?" And like just walked up and just talked to Luigi for a while. And I'm like, "Oh, okay. This is not what I expected." But it's kind of cool. But that is the extent I'll talk about my Albuquerque trip, because it doesn't really have anything to do with our podcast. But it was a fun time, as you can imagine. But we're not here to talk about Albuquerque. We're here to talk about movies. Where we're going to be talking about 3 movies shot during the Hays Code era of Hollyweird. And we'll be going into what that is, because I don't know if a ton of people know this period in Hollywood history. It's very old. But I would say it has a lot of impact on how both movies are rated today and what movies are made, and how movies are made. Because we talked not last week, but last time, about 3 movies that were made before this era. Frankly, none of them really violated any of the rules that the Hays Code put in place. But we'll be talking a little bit about movies that were made during the Hays Code. But first, let's talk about what that is exactly. So, set the scene. It's 1934, and people are starting to get a little worried about this whole communism thing again, because I think this is around the time of the second Red Scare, maybe right before it. And so,
McCarthyism.
yeah, right around there. People are like, ooh, I'm a little worried that traditional American values and beliefs are going to be completely destroyed by the Red Menace across the ocean. Let's do something about it. And so, without any prompting, this is not a government thing. This is completely on the studios. This is very much in the time of the studio system, where, studios were it's not totally different, but movie studios were more focused on pushing out art than they are today. I think around the 60s is when the studio system died. And those studios would declare bankruptcy and then were bought out by like business conglomerates. So like Paramount became Paramount, a Gulf and Western company, or like Universal became like a Comcast company. So it was no longer like we need to make art for art's sake, and the money is going to be a nice little byproduct that will allow us to create more art. It is movies are things to make money for us, the suits at the top, and we are going to keep making movies because they make money. No real artistic meaning. So think like, what's his name, Zavlov, the Warner Brothers fella. He just doesn't like movies at all, and that really wouldn't have happened before the studio system kind of died. But right around the Hays Code era, right before, the studio's like, hey, okay, we need to have a set of rules that we are going to self-impose just so that we don't get in trouble by Uncle Sam, and maybe so that we don't get McCarthy'd. So we aren't going to have to testify before court that we're not communists. So let's make our movies, traditional, and put in place some values and practices that are going to limit the kinds of risque things that could happen in Hollywood before that time. And I think it is also important to note that the Catholic Church had a very large say in what specific values were put in place, which is something that is somewhat recently been uncovered. Their participation in the creation of these rules had been kind of covered up for a very, very long time. I think up until the 90s or 2000s, it kind of came out, which is a long time ago, but it was 70 years after these things were put into place. So it was covered up for a long time. And we'll go into what that did. I think we'll go in terms of least severe to most questionable. So least severe, you got murder. You shouldn't have murder in movies be in a way that will teach people how to do murder. Which, I don't really think movies today are necessarily doing that, but this meant that murder had to kind of be implied. Maybe you show a silhouette, or maybe you just don't show it at all, and then you have characters talk about it in the next scene and be like, man, that was really weird that we found a gaping wound in this lady's neck. Ooh, would have been too scary to show though. Like that. So, and also brutal murders were not at all a thing. You could not even mention that someone got brutally murdered, whatever that means. I guess these things are kind of vague, but that's what that is. Something maybe a little questionable, is that like there is like no sex at all. Sex cannot be brought up at all. You can't even have like a scene where like someone kisses someone and then they like cut away, because that implies that they're having sex. Like that is, you cannot even hint at the fact that there is going to be sex. You cannot even have a passionate kissing scene because that is too risque. All kisses cannot be. There is even a like a bullet point in the Hays Code that says excessive and lustful kissing, lustful embraces, suggestive postures and gestures are not to be shown. So you have to be very, very above the belt, which we will be talking about, because there are a couple movies that we are going to be talking about. One very strictly follows the Hays Code, and one bends it a little bit, which I was surprised by. And then let's get into the weirdo ones, the ones that are very, very questionable. White slavery shall not be treated. But black slavery and racism really is fine. In fact, interracial relationships you cannot have that at all. You cannot hint at it. Basically, interactions between races have to be very, very above the board, which we will be talking about extensively in one of the movies. Which, is definitely a product of its time, and it's a little bit weird that these codes lasted until 1968, which is a crazy long time for some of these things. Now, it wasn't enforced super strict, in the 60s. Stuff was still getting made that had interracial relationships during that time, but it was kind of a little risque. You're gonna have a black person kiss a white person. Ooh, that's very, very, very sketchy. But that's pretty much the Hays Code. It's very interesting to read because there's a lot of stuff in it that's like, oh, weird. Like I think the white slavery one was just like, I was reading it and then it's just like it has its own like section, and it's like most of these are like broken up where it's like this is all the things that have to do with murder and violence. This is the one that has to do with sex, and then it's just like this is the one, white slavery should not be treated. Now let's talk about vulgarity and what you can and can't say, which surprisingly, you can't say God, Lord, Jesus, Christ, anything really, which is interesting that they separate G-O-D and G-A-W-D. I don't know why. Seems like the same word to me.
God, secular.
God, secular, I guess. But it's kind of funny because they have like all this stuff at the top where it's like, don't have no violence, no sex, no vulgarity. And then at the very, very bottom, it's like, oh yeah, you can't criticize religion at all. Ministers of religion are only to be portrayed as like, virtuous, great people. They're never to be portrayed as villains or even as like comedic characters. You can't have a priest be funny. They have to be serious and given authority. And like ceremonies of like any religion have to be very respectfully handled. Like all of the stuff that was clearly done by like the Catholic Church is just thrown in at the bottom where it's like, don't make fun of us, please. And also respect the flag. That's at the bottom too. So that's what the Hays Code is. It lasted a very, very long time. I wanted to include this section in the horror movie marathon because, and this might surprise some people, I have seen a movement. It's very, very small, and I think it's mostly people who are maybe under the age of 18 that are online, wanting to reinforce the Hays Code, to reinstate it. Now, I don't
That
think
person, Ben Shapiro.
I don't think it. Here's the thing: is I have not seen it from conservatives. I have seen it from like really young people. Maybe they are a fan of a certain Minecraft streamer. That's just kind of the vibe I get. I'm not insinuating that.
Interesting.
I'm just saying.
I feel like there's more here.
There probably is, but I'm just like, it's just that kind of vibe. And it's from people who are uncomfortable with sex scenes. That tends to be what I'm seeing.
I understand. I understand exactly what's
Yes,
happening.
they are. I think they saw somewhere that the Hays Code outlawed sex scenes and was like, we need to reinforce that, and didn't read that you can't have an interracial relationship in a movie. I'm assuming that's
literally
what's
anything else.
Really, yes. it completely censors pretty much every movie that has been made post this period. So like I did want to bring that up because I have seen it and I'm like, oh, that's kind of weird. Let's do a deep dive because I haven't really looked at it in any sort of like critical lens. I'm like, I pretty much saw it and was like, art censorship, that's bad. And pretty much was just like, that's that. But so I wanted to look into it a little bit and I wanted to see specifically how horror movies were affected because I think generally if we're talking about all of the big genres of movies that are being made, horror is definitely the one that pushes the boundary of what can and can't be shown. Like you aren't going to see like Saw level violence in a drama, or well, maybe you'd see it in a sci-fi movie, but that tends to be a little more clinical. So I was just like, let's see this genre that is known for pushing the boundaries. Let's see how it is affected by a code that limited the boundaries. And what I saw was, frankly, it didn't change a whole lot, but it did make the movies a little worse, I think, because this week we collectively, as in me and the audience, watched The Wolf Man from 1941, I Walked with a Zombie from 1943, and The Curse of Frankenstein from 1957. Those were very deliberately picked by me because I wanted to pick two that were in the beginning of the Hays Code era and one that was at the end so that we can compare and contrast. And what I saw shocked me. Not really. I will say that this batch here was maybe the most boring. I mean, well, I've only seen this one on last week's, but I think Frankenstein just kind of was like, I loved that movie. It was great. And so then it was kind of weird watching The Curse of Frankenstein because, you know, the title insinuates maybe a paranormal element, there being some sort of spell, a curse, if you will. There isn't. It's just Frankenstein again. It's the same movie, but we'll get into that. We'll talk about that one last. We'll talk about The Wolf Man first, which is the one that I watched before I went to Albuquerque, so it's the one I'm least fresh with. But this movie, I thought, was the one that had the creepiest sexual advances in it out of all of the movies I have seen so far. Not all of the movies I have seen in general, but of this marathon, which is weird because you're not supposed to have those. But it is just this guy, the guy who ends up being the Wolf Man. He is the creepiest guy ever, and I don't think they meant for that to be the case. I think they tried to make him like, oh, he's just kind of endearing, and oh, he just wants to win the girl in the end or whatever. I'm trying to put my mind or myself in the mind of a 40s moviegoer. But I thought he was extremely creepy. We we introduce our main character. He moves from America to his home in Germany, and just to justify that the main character has an American accent and everyone else doesn't. And he gets a telescope because he is like a astronomer, which is something they only bring up at the beginning to justify the meet cute, because he is looking through his telescope and is looking at the town, and then he just so happens to see a lady in her bedroom just kind of looking out the window, and he notices like her earrings and like, oh, I'm gonna go talk to her. So then he goes up to the store and is like, hey lady, I saw you in your bedroom above the store here. Well, actually he doesn't say that, he keeps that a secret. He's like, hey, do you have these earrings? I really want these earrings. And she's like, actually they're not in stock, you stupid idiot. I would never have those. And he's like, actually I know you have them, they're in the bedroom upstairs. And she's like, how did you know that? And he's like, I'm a psychic. And she's like, oh, pish posh. Wanna go out with me to go see this caravan of gypsies that are a fortune teller? And he's like, yes, I would love to do that, actually. That sounds awesome. And so then they see a fortune teller who was played by Bela Lugosi. I think I said last week that he was going to show up again. I didn't know that he actually was. I was just like, yeah, he's in like every single horror movie after this. So he did show up very briefly. He plays the fortune teller that's like, hey, you're going to die. And then he turns into a wolf and kills someone, which is a pretty good, it's pretty accurate. He's like, hey, you're going to die. You should probably leave. And then this lady leaves, and then, he kills her. And then he strikes the creepy man, and that turns him into a wolf man, which, hello. Which, frankly, this guy should have saw coming, because when he went to the store to hit on the lady that he was creeping on with his telescope, he bought a staff that had a wolf head and it had a pentagram on it, which they claim is the sign of the wolf, which I guess may have been true in the 40s. But it was as clear as foreshadowing as could be. And the lady at the store was like, hey, that's the sign of the werewolf. Why do you want that staff? And he's like, I don't know, it looks cool. But then, he gets bitten by Bela Lugosi. And then he's just like walking around with this werewolf staff. And he's talking to, can I say gypsy? Is that a slur?
I think you can say it in the connotation you're using it in.
Okay, I'm not calling the movie is calling these people gypsies. And I frankly don't know what ethnic group or whatever this is. They're just like traveling like merchants and fortune tellers, I guess. Weird mystic types. It is kind of weird. I did kind of want to talk about this. I forgot that I was going to talk about this until just now. But this movie came out in 1941 and kind of shows gypsies as like weirdo magic people that like cast spells on people while they're actively being persecuted in Germany and being put in concentration camps and stuff. I just thought that was kind of odd.
Yeah, anti-Semitism and like anti-gypsy anything was like kind of rabid for like a long time before Germany did a oopsie, and then everybody had to kind of be quiet about it.
Yeah, I'm sure. But it was just like, oh, wait. After I realized that, I'm like, oh, this is really weird. Also, is gypsy just like Eastern European? Because
I don't know.
if so, that's weird typecasting because Bela Lugosi is Hungarian. I don't know.
It's not. I just looked this up somewhat recently. I don't remember why, but I It's like a specific, like, in Romania, it's like a specific group of people, I think.
Oh, okay. So it wouldn't be.
I know
a
it has
Hungarian
something to do with
person.
Romania, I think. Because they're also called the Romani, right?
I have heard that. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the better term to call them, maybe? Or it's like the one you call them now
Okay.
instead of gypsy.
Okay. Well, I
I
won't
don't know.
say it
You'd have to
anymore.
Google this up.
I won't say it
I like that.
anymore just because they aren't in the movie really hardly ever after this. They just show up and they're like, hey, you're going to die. You're going to turn into a wolf. And then, yeah, there's like an old lady that's like, oh, you are the wolf man. Here, take a charm that's going to save you from being the wolf man. And he's like, I don't want to be the wolf man. I'm going to give it to the lady at the store. And so he gives the charm to the lady at the store, which is frankly a rookie mistake. Because almost immediately after that, he turns into the wolf man. And, you know, people try to kill him. But it doesn't work because they don't have silver bullets, which is part of the Wolfman canon, I suppose. It's kind of weird that that started here at the first one. There's so many things in like the Dracula movie that are like, oh, well, he isn't scared of garlic in this movie. He's scared of wolfsbane, which frankly should have been for the Wolfman, which they don't bring up in the Wolfman. They do bring up wolfsbane, but I don't think it scares the Wolfman, which, you know, I don't know. But overall, I thought this movie was pretty lame, weird, and creepy. But I wasn't bored, so that's something, I guess. But that's the best thing about all of these movies is that they each clock in at a little over an hour. So they're really over before you really settle in, which for one movie is to its detriment, but to the other two, it's actually a positive. Because The Wolfman, I feel like I would not have wanted an extra half an hour to an hour of. And The Curse of Frankenstein, I definitely did not want another hour of. But I Walked with a Zombie, frankly, I could have watched like a 2.5 hour movie about it. But we'll talk about that right now. I Walked with a Zombie, 1943. Want to talk about racism? This is the one for you. If you're a racist, I don't know if you're going to like it. It's just kind of weird. It's a weird, I don't know why I'm curating for racists. That's not what I meant to do.
You see, at this podcast, we curate towards the most racist of people and only them.
That's not what I meant. I Walked with a Zombie. This is 1943. This is before Dawn of the Dead. We recently did the critically acclaimed podcast episode Zomboy Time, where we
won 3 Emmys.
It won 3 daytime
podcasties.
Emmys. Podcasties. That's what they should be called. Where we did a little deep dive on 3 different zombie movies made at different times, and started with Night of the Living Dead, not Dawn of the Dead. Night of the Living Dead. And that one was the first one to kind of make canon the zombie myth. So it's kind of interesting that this movie came out 20 years before that and really has nothing to do with zombies. It's zombie in like the traditional sense. And I think I briefly brought it up when we did that episode. But zombies before George Romero made them, living corpses, were like tied with like voodoo and witch doctor isms of like the Caribbean type things. Racists. And this movie does kind of play into that. It's a very weird movie, and it's weird that it's the one I'm most positive on. But if you told me that like Jordan Peele was heavily inspired by this when he made Get Out, I would not be surprised at all. Although it's not like I have to justify that, because it isn't like, a couple goes out to the Caribbean and then they start noticing weird things. The story is that there's a nurse in Canada that takes a job for $200 a month which I looked it up and is like $4,500. So
Okay.
pretty good, pretty good. To go out to Antigua to be a nurse to like a wealthy white. It's kind of hard to describe. There's a wealthy white family in Antigua that it's heavily insinuated were slave owners. The courtyard of their like estate has a figurehead of a slave ship that has been turned into a fountain, which is like the closing shot of the movie, so it's important. And the wife of like the I guess the oldest son has kind of entered like a weird limbo state where basically she's it's kind of it's really hard to describe, but she's just kind of in like a waking coma, I guess. She's like able to walk around and like can be moved and positioned in different ways, like, but they mostly just keep her in bed. But she is like not conscious. Her eyes are open, but like she's not able to react or do anything. She's basically just sleepwalking forever.
Like a vegetable state, kind of?
Kind of, yeah. But like she can still move, and like people like walk her around, but like she can't. She doesn't have any emotions. She can't talk or really do anything. Which is, yeah, I don't know. But it's just like the nurse comes in and then like she starts uncovering some like secrets about the family. Like the younger brother is like starting to become an alcoholic, and maybe the husband of the wife ends up like maybe kind of pushing her to this state. It's kind of insinuated that he may have done it to her, and that is what all of the, I don't want to say natives, because they're all, not all, I think. Actually, they don't show any native people. I think it's all just like descendants of slaves. That's what they think. They think that the husband did it. And so it's basically, I guess, the crux of the movie is that the nurse comes in, uncovers all these things, and is basically, she falls in love with the husband that may have turned his wife into a walking vegetable. And
Perfect.
and so she's like, I want to help his wife because I love him, which is weird because this guy is like basically a doomer before doomers or a thing. Like she's on like this old wooden ship from Canada to Antigua, and he's there for some reason. I don't know. I don't think it's ever explained. But he's on the ship, and like she's like looking out over the water, and like we don't actually see any of it because it's a movie from 1941 and it's probably just a ship on rear screen projection. But it's just like we just hear her internal monologue, which is kind of a constant, which is kind of weird. It's like a horror noir mix, which is odd. And she's just like, oh, the waves crashing against the beach and the palm trees, and I can just see the glittering of the ocean. It's just so beautiful. It's so much beautiful than Ottawa, where it's gross and snowy. And then like this guy like somehow reads her mind, is like, it's not beautiful, idiot. He says it in a British accent, so it sounds charming. Oh, you idiot! I can't do it.
You imbecile.
You imbecile. Except he's doing like a transatlantic thing, but
Oh, yeah, of course.
they play it off as British. And he's like, it's not beautiful. The glittering you're seeing in the ocean is from dead bodies decomposing, and you see those flying fish. They aren't flying because they're leaping for joy. It's because they're scared of bigger fish in the ocean that are going to eat them. You see, this is a land of death and destruction. And then he just like dips, And she's like, yeah, this guy is weird, but I couldn't help but fall in love with him. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. What? Why would you ever think that? Because that guy just completely ruined your vibe. And then you're just like, I think I kind of love him.
It's the hair. It's always the hair.
Yeah, he had slick, like gelled back hair, and he had a mustache.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was the hair. Had to have
Yeah.
been.
He was a very attractive man. I will give him that. So yeah, she comes in and then she takes the wife to a witch doctor. And that's the crux of the short, if you will. That's that she takes the lady to a witch doctor. And this is when I wanted to bring up the religious part of the Hays Code, because there's a very clear bullet that says ceremonies of any definite religion should be carefully and respectfully handled. And I don't know if that was the case when it came to, I guess it's not a definite religion, so I guess I'll give the Hays Code that, because it is just like witch doctor stereotypes of Caribbean beliefs. Because it's just like a bunch of people like dancing, and there's like a guy banging on the drum. And then they'd like, for the rest of the movie, there's like an actual, well, I don't want to say actual, but like Western doctor that is like, oh, you see, it's all psychosomatic and Western medicine, Western Union, haha, woohoo. That's the only real thing, you stupid natives. And then the nurse is like, actually, I'm not sure if they think that they can help this lady, then I want to do it because I love this weird abusive guy. And that's the conflict. It's her, the drama between her wanting to help this lady and also her training as a Western medicine nurse. I liked this movie a lot. It's weird and kind of racist. I didn't even get into all of the weird. Every single. Here's what I will say. This movie is the only one out of the three that has any people of color in it, but every person of color is either a servant, a musician, or participating in weird stereotypical religious ceremonies. So basically stereotype the movie. So that will dock at some points, but I thoroughly enjoyed, like I was hooked. I'm like, this is kind of a mystery. Or it's like, well, how did this lady get into this state? And it's kind of like you're starting to question where it's like, oh wait, did the husband have anything to do with it? Or are like the natives right? And that like maybe like someone put a curse on this lady to kind of do like some sort of revenge for the whole slavery thing and bringing them, to a foreign island that none of them are from. There's a line in it when the nurse first arrives. She's being like driven there by, actually not. I'm not assuming a descendant from an African slave, and he's like kind of talking about like the landscape and how like, how everything is. And then the nurse is like, well, it's, the white people really brought you to a beautiful place. And the guy says, if you say, miss, if you say. I'm like, oh, okay, a little bit of something, but then it goes on to portray every single black person as like backwards and primitive. I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. So there's like, that's why I'm like, if Jordan Peele kind of did that, but like the reverse of it, where a black person goes to like a white house in the middle of nowhere, and he starts uncovering all these weird things, and there's a little bit of like a supernatural element to it, questioning like what's real, what isn't. But this one is definitely more problematic, so that does dock at some points. But I enjoyed it, and I think it's worth a watch, if not just to compare it to modern, movies, especially surrounding race, which has been probably one of the most interesting aspects of this little marathon so far. And we will not be talking about that at all until the end, when we will be talking about a Jordan Peele movie, Us. So it'll come full circle. But for now, we still have to talk about old racist movies. Not that The Curse of Frankenstein is racist, because there's no black people in it at all. The Curse of Frankenstein is the Frankenstein movie again, but worse? Question mark? I don't know. Well, actually, I liked Frankenstein quite a bit, so I am going to put an exclamation point. It's worse. I was kind of looking forward to it going in, because it has quite a cast. Christopher Lee as Frankenstein, frankly, not a good pick. Christopher Lee, famous for playing Dracula around this time. Many thought of like Bela Lugosi as Dracula for a very long time, and then kind of Christopher Lee kind of reinvented it around the 50s. So I guess he was just kind of hot in the horror scene. So like, hey, let's make him Frankenstein too. And I'm like, well, it doesn't really fit as Frankenstein. That's like why Boris Karloff is such a great fit, because he's a weird, and I mean this in the best possible way. He's a weird looking guy, big and lanky. And like kind of a weird shaped face. And I mean this totally as a positive thing, because he's great. That's what makes him a great movie monster. Christopher Lee's just kind of normal. I don't want to say normal looking. This is kind of hard to talk about. But he's just a British guy, not super scary looking. That's why he works as like Dracula, because he's kind of suave, but British, unfortunately. Again. Wait, I need to look up this guy's name, who actually plays Dr. Frankenstein. Yes, it is. It is Peter Cushing. That is what I thought his name was. Yes, famous for being. I think I told the Star Wars story last week, so not last week, but last time. So I won't say it again, but I think that is probably what he's most known for these days. I don't think most people remember him for being Dr. Frankenstein in The Curse of Frankenstein. But yeah, this movie, I would say, is a perfect 2.5 out of 5, or a perfect 5 out of 10 movie, because I think it takes what the original Frankenstein didn't have and adds it, but then doesn't do what the original Frankenstein did great, and that is the Frankenstein's monster stuff. The great thing in this movie is that it really spends like a sizable amount of time before like the monster is created. It's maybe like 40 to 50 minutes before the monster is like made alive, and this is like, I think it's an hour 20. So I actually lied when I said that all of them clock in a little over an hour. I guess it is a little over an hour in the grand scheme of things, but it's more than the other ones. So like the monster is only really alive for like 25 to 30 minutes, and then the movie's over. Which really is just like, I want this movie to be like 2 hours long, which I hardly ever push for movies to be longer. But this one, I'm like, I could have. It really needed it, because I really enjoyed all of the stuff before the monster was alive, and then after, it was just kind of a slog where it's like, oh, this is a Frankenstein movie, it needs to have this and this and this, and then it's over. Although it didn't have the scene where Frankenstein throws a little girl into a lake and then she drowns, which is probably the best part of the original Frankenstein movie because it's so uncalled for. But so I was kind of disappointed that that wasn't in it. But yeah, so it spends like a really, really long time on Before Frankenstein was a thing, and it spends a long time establishing Dr. Frankenstein as a character. He is the main protagonist in this movie, and we see him as a young teenager up until he becomes kind of a mad scientist. In the original movie, I think the opening scene is Dr. Frankenstein digging a grave to get like a corpse to add to the Frankenstein's monster. This movie, they don't start like grave robbing until like 30 to 40 minutes in. Like it really takes its time to establish Dr. Frankenstein as a character, as a legitimate scientist, and like why he would be doing this. Like in the original, he's just like, I want to create a life. There's like gamma rays or something radioactive because it's an old horror movie and everything's nuclear. Let's create a life. I'm evil for being evil. And it's like, well, okay, this guy, it starts off, and the whole reason that he's getting into this is because he and his science partner, who is not a stereotypical hunchback, he is actually his tutor from when he was a teenager, and they just ended up being science partners, is to like basically reanimate, well, not reanimate, but basically like figure out what makes life so that like they can put people under and then like reattach limbs and like take stuff that is dead and make it alive so that like it can better humanity in some sort of way. So it's like completely understandable why he would be looking to create a monster or create life, because he's trying to help people. And that's something that like his partner is kind of an audience insert, or maybe a conscious insert, where he's like, oh yes, this is great, we're working on all this stuff, we should publish our findings right now. And Dr. Frankenstein's like, no, I think we should keep going. And now that we have reanimated a dead dog, maybe we should try to create something that was never alive to begin with. And then as that process goes, his science partner like drops out. It's like, I can't help you anymore. This is getting too sketchy. Now that you are grave robbing, I cannot be involved. This goes against ethics. And then it just kind of about 20 minutes of that where it's like, I'm stealing eyes from a dead body. Look how pretty these eyes are. And then his science partner is like, I cannot be a part of this. But then he keeps coming back and is like, what are you up to in here? And he's like, I'm actually chopping off the hands of a gymnast because I want my monster to have pretty hands. And he's like, I cannot be a part of this. This is way too much for me, but I will be back in 2 to 3 days to see what you're up to because I'm very curious, but I just cannot be a part of it. Which really, if you think about it, he's really like kind of implicating himself because he's not doing anything about it. He's just like, I cannot be a part of it, but I'm not going to do anything to stop you either. So really, this guy's just as guilty as Dr. Frankenstein, but the movie does not view him that way. He is seen as the good guy in this movie. But then, eventually the monster is created and it starts killing people. And, audience insert man is like, you should kill that thing. It's killing people. And then Dr. Frankenstein's like, well, yeah. And it tried to kill me, but I think I can fix him. He's a girl that sees an abusive man and is like, I can fix him. Or I guess really anybody who sees anyone abusive and is like, I can fix them. That's Dr. Frankenstein in 1957. And, he doesn't. And he ends up getting killed by the monster. Well, I know he doesn't end up getting killed by the monster. He almost ends up getting killed by the monster. But he ends up killing the monster the only way that Frankenstein can die. Everybody say it with me. He burns alive. Because Frankenstein doesn't like fire. That's the classic Frankenstein. Everybody knows it. You know, vampires are afraid of Dracula.
Did you just like drown him so he couldn't breathe?
No. Well, actually, that is kind of weird because here's the thing. They have a fight on the balcony of his castle. And and, you know, Dr. Frankenstein's backed into a corner and Frankenstein's going to go, oh, I'm going to get you. And then it just so happens that Dr. Frankenstein is holding like one of those gas candles and he chucks it at Frankenstein as a last ditch ever. I don't think he expected it to set him on fire, but it does. And then he falls through the window into a pool. And so I don't know. He doesn't get up, but I don't think he was burned enough to die. He was only on fire for like 30 seconds. But everyone's like, okay, thank God he's dead. But also, Dr. Frankenstein, you created a monster, so you're going to go to jail. And the last shot of the movie is he's being like escorted out of the jail, and then it pans over to the silhouette of a guillotine, and then the credits roll over that. And the whole time, I was like, come on, guillotine, drop. You're going to do it. I want to see it drop. And I don't even need like a sound effect of like a lady screaming or anything. I just want the guillotine to drop and then for it to cut to black. And then that would be a great end of the movie. And it never dropped. It was just silhouette of a guillotine that was primed to drop on Dr. Frankenstein, and it never did, which I guess is maybe to insinuate that there is going to be a sequel, because I think there were 2 to 3 sequels to this movie. But frankly, I don't care about the sequels. I just wanted Dr. Frankenstein to get his head lopped off by a guillotine at the end of this movie, and it didn't happen. I didn't even need to see it. I just wanted to see the silhouette of the guillotine drop. And I don't think that was too much to ask, because the shot starts with the guillotine being raised up. So you already did the work of raising it up. Just reverse the footage. And they couldn't even do that. That's why this movie gets a 2 out of 10. Even though I think I just spent like most of this review raving about it when it was the one.
Don't you review out of 5 also?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anymore. I'm just... Really, here's the thing. I review out of 5, but I also do decibels. I also do halves, which essentially is a 10.
It's just 10, yeah.
So a 3.5 is nothing but a 7 out of 10. So yeah, but let's talk about the Hays Code thing. I talked about it a little bit, Wolfman. Let's do a whole wraparound thing. How did the Curse of Frankenstein do in terms of Hays Code things? Because, you know, there was no interracial relationships and I walked with a zombie. There was no white slavery and I walked with a zombie either, mind you. And there was really, you know, there was no real religion other than witch doctor things, and I walked with a zombie. And the Wolfman, there was creepy sexual advances, but I don't think they ever kissed. I think he was just like wanted to like bang this lady so bad. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the lady was engaged. That was probably a crucial detail that I forgot to bring up. But, you know, so there's nothing really happened there. He was just like wanted to be with this lady, but she was engaged. And, you know, they respected that because marriage as an institution is never to be questioned in a movie, which I feel like is something that's in the Hays Code. I should maybe look that up as I'm talking here. Adultery, sometimes necessary plot material, must not be explicitly treated or justified or presented attractively. So,
Attractively.
you cannot have someone who's married and maybe has a relationship with the protagonist and have that be something that is desirable. So, yeah, I couldn't have that in The Wolfman. But how is that handled in The Curse of Frankenstein? Because not only did this movie come out in 1957, towards the end of the Hays Code era, it was also made in the UK. So not in the Hollywood studio system. So how did this compare? Well, let me tell you, because there are some passionate kissing scenes in this film. Ooh boy, are there. And it's not between Dr. Frankenstein and his betrothed, who we will get to. It is between him and his maid. Ooh, very, very scandalous, I should say, but it is very passionate. I mean, no tongue. Thankfully, I don't think I wanted to see Peter Cushing.
Stuff up the devil.
That would have been too much. But they do have, like, I don't know how to describe it, like 50s movie kiss, where it's not open mouth, but they just like kiss each other for a really, really long time. You know, they're just like sitting there for like 30 seconds, just not doing anything, just, you know, faces pressed against each other. They're mashing it, if you will. So they have that, and it's heavily implied. I mean, like really heavily implied that they are banging. Like, the maid at one point says, "I'm glad that I I love to service the family." And then Dr. Frankenstein's like, "Yeah, you sure service my needs." It's something like that. It's not exactly that, but it's something like that. So it's pretty scandalous, you know, towards the end. But let's talk about the wife, because Dr. Frankenstein's wife is his first cousin. So apparently incest, not off the books. You know, you can do that in the movie and during the Hays Code, it's fine. And not only that, it is like set up from the beginning. The beginning of the movie is Dr. Frankenstein as a young teenager as his mom died. His mom died and left him a bunch of money. You know, he's like a heir to the Frankenstein family name, I guess, and his mom was his only living parent, so then he is, you know, inherits all this wealth, and it's at the funeral where his aunt is like, "Hey, look at my daughter, you know? What do you think, huh? She'd make a beautiful bride one day." And he's like, yeah, I don't care. I'm a 13-year-old boy. I don't want to bang my 9-year-old cousin. That's weird. But, you know, fast forward 20 to 30 years later, and that's all good. Although we never see any sort of romantic things going on between them. It's just between Dr. Frankenstein and the maid, which frankly, I think is fine. You know, you can bang the maid. You just can't bang your cousin. And they don't do that in the movie, but it is weird that they are married. So I thought I should bring that up. It doesn't really have any bearing on the plot. She's just kind of there. I think she's the reason that Conscious Man shows up, because he's like, "I won't let you do these science experiments while this lady's in the house. You can't reanimate a body when there's a lady in the house." I don't know why I said that like Steve Brule. But that's why he keeps showing up. And I was like, "Hey, you doing something good for once?" He's like, "No, you idiot. I found out how to suture a dead body to make sure that the guts don't come out." And you're like, "That's evil. You're so bad, Dr. Frankenstein." So there you go. That's the Hays Code era horror movie breakdown. Yeah, those movies. I should probably note, I wanted to kind of do a nice survey of horror movies for this, breakdown, but I am not, there's a lot here that I wanted to talk about that we frankly don't have enough time for. Like, we could talk about Psycho, came out in 1960, famously the first movie to have a toilet in it.
Let's go.
It took that long to have a toilet in a movie. And it was kind of interesting. We'll briefly talk about it because it is kind of fun. That movie, Alfred Hitchcock wanted to make a movie that had a toilet in it. Like, that was was something he really wanted. He wanted to be the first person to have a toilet in a movie. And basically the like production designer and like the producers were like, okay, you want to have a toilet in a movie? Make it integral to the plot because otherwise the studio is going to cut it out. And so, you know, there's a famous, I'd say the scene from Psycho that everybody knows. It's the shower scene. Right before that, she like, I forget what she rips up. She rips up something and then throws it in the toilet and flushes it. So like he made it integral to the plot where like that's something that Janet Leigh had to do for the plot right before she got stabbed in a shower. So yeah, I want to talk about that. You know, I want to talk about there's a lot of great horror movies in the 70s. Couldn't talk about any of those. Couldn't talk about John Carpenter at all, which is sad, really. I'm glad we're going to talk about Wes Craven a little bit with Nightmare on Elm Street. But yeah, I'm very, you know, I wanted to include way more than I reasonably could within the time frame of October. I mean, it's bleeding into November as it is because I was gone a week. But I just wanted to, you know, try to come in front of some criticism because not that I'm getting any, but like I feel bad because there's so many things that I want to talk about, but can't because I want to have a survey of kind of the whole genre, as it were. So it's a little unfortunate. We're skipping all the way from 1957 to 1980, starting with the slasher craze, which is also unfortunate. Like I mentioned last time, I wish I could talk about Halloween. I probably will bring it up because you can't really talk about the slasher craze. You can't really talk about Friday the 13th without talking about Halloween. But yeah, next week, Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. Those movies are pretty accessible. They're all on Max. Unfortunately, I have to call it that now, but that is, they're all there. In fact, Friday the 13th just had a theatrical re-release this last weekend because it was Friday the 13th. I did not see it. Yeah, I didn't know that. It was kind of cool because, you know, Friday the 13th just so happened to be in October this year. So I guess to celebrate that, they re-released it for a weekend. I thought that was kind of cool, but every showing was at 9 p.m. and I had work the next day, both days. So I'm like, I can't. Even though it's a pretty short movie, I just, you know, I wanted to make sure that I could sleep the night that I saw it. Not that I'm going to be watching these movies during the day. But I will say that we are probably going to be entering the time where these movies might actually scare me because I was never scared in any of the last 6 movies. But I think some of that just came with age. It's kind of fun to imagine like someone in the 40s watching The Wolfman and being scared when someone gets murdered off screen. Because like you don't even see anything. What are you supposed to be scared of? It's like it's a shot of a tree and there's a lady screaming and like sound effects of like. It's like I'm not scared of that, you know. I just hear that anyways from people who live next door to me in my apartment. Oh yeah, that's what we call a slapper. But you know, I have heard that the first Nightmare on Elm Street is genuinely scary. They tend to get a little bit hammier as the series went on. I don't think I'm going to be scared of Friday the 13th because I've seen Halloween. We will talk about that next week. But yeah, that is it. I did watch. I watched the new Joe Pera comedy special. I don't want to, you know, take up too much time. It's good. It's on YouTube. So watch it.
The best streaming service.
It's probably the best. I saw it was like I do subscribe to Joe Pera's email newsletter,
Yes.
which is probably the best source of information from Joe Pera. And there was something like they chose specifically to do it independent because they were, they saw like stuff getting pulled from streaming services and stuff getting canceled unexpectedly on certain streaming services that they just kind of wanted to do their own thing on YouTube, which I thought was a funny dig at Warner Brothers for canceling their show. So it's on YouTube. It's pretty good. It's so niche though. Like it is such a, it's not like if you like Kevin Hart, you're going to love the Joe Pera comedy special. It's like you have to really like that brand of comedy to like it. But if you like either the show or the Joe Pera Talks You to Sleep, the YouTube video, then I think you'll like it. And I also watched the film The Kid, the Charlie Chaplin movie, and I don't really want to talk about it either because I've already talked enough. But I watched it on the plane to Albuquerque because I'm like, hey, a silent movie, that's a good thing to watch on an airplane because I don't have to worry about sounds really. Little did I know that this would be by far my favorite silent movie I've ever seen, and like not only does it hold up, it's really, really good. Which is, surprising because I talked about The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari last time and I did not really like it. So I went into it just being like, this is something to watch on a plane, and I was like blown away. So watch The Kid. It's also on Max. I think there's a bunch of Charlie Chaplin stuff on Max for some reason. I don't know why Warner Brothers has the exclusive rights to Charlie Chaplin movies that are 100 years old, but there you go. But I think with that, I'll toss it on over to Babby for music and other segment, propaganda segment show.
Well,
Yippee. I'm not doing music this week. I can't focus on music right now.
no
okay.
music.
Not happening. I'll do it next week. There's some stuff that came out, but I don't want to talk about it right now. Yeah. So we'll skip that this week. I have a lot to get through for my main segment, so I did not want to bog it down with 20 minutes of music talk this week.
Okay.
But moving on to the You Are Not Immune to Propaganda segment, and boy, are you not immune to propaganda. So a couple of things have been happening the past couple of weeks. I've been losing my mind. I feel like I'm going insane. The dread I've felt in the past couple of weeks is just incredible. So I'm going in there. I don't care. We're doing Israel Palestine.
Go into it, brother.
Yeah.
We've lost our channel already.
Yeah, I know. We're gonna get blocked on all platforms, but it's fine. So I have 10 pages of notes. So hopefully this doesn't take too long. But at the same time, it's gonna be a lot, and it's gonna be very heavy, and it might get emotional. So just be warned. Yeah. On October 7th, Hamas led an attack on Israel. They bursted through the Gaza border wall and started to regain Palestinian land. This is a surprise attack. The Israeli government, who has an incredibly invasive and brutal security measures, were completely caught off guard. And the result of this initial assault was Palestinians briefly regaining some of their land, and it resulted in about 450 combined deaths on both sides, and a lot more injuries. So if you take this out of context and you don't have any knowledge or context of the history of the conflict between Israel and Palestine, this purely looks like a senseless terrorist attack and makes Israel look like a victim. And this is the way that the media has spun it. They're still spinning it like this. They will do that until the end of time. Let me be as clear as I can possibly be. You should not be supporting Israel. And my segment today is to explain why, give you the resources and knowledge to combat this. Yeah, I know a lot of people are kind of uncomfortable around this subject, but I ask everybody to please tune into this segment and hear me out today. This is a very optional part of the podcast, but I feel like it's a lot more important than it usually is right now. This is one of the biggest conflicts of the last century and this century. And we're already kind of seeing the dire consequences of this. And I want everybody to be on the right side of history and to be informed. Yes, that requires reading and learning. Your media will not tell you the truth, and being a bystander or supporting the wrong side in this conflict is incredibly dangerous now and in the future. I have a lot to get to. I want to cover a brief history of Palestine, Zionism, and Israel. I also want to go over the media response to this conflict, the blatant racist propaganda that's been coming out, and resources to help you combat it. First, couple key points before I dive into history. There is no both sidesing this issue. Israel is an apartheid settler colonial state. Gaza is the world's largest open-air prison. No Palestinians can go in or out. They have no say over whether they get food, water, or even electricity. Israel is in control of all of these things. So let's start with a history of the area, I guess. I don't know. There's a lot of different elements here. This is going to be very, very condensed. As I was writing, I found I was getting too specific, and I would have probably had 25 pages of notes.
I was going to say, there's like
there
thousands
so
of
much to
years of
cover.
history.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I tried to keep all the things that are mostly relevant in here, and hopefully it doesn't drag on because I do want to get to the current day so I don't lose people. But let's start with Zionism. Zionism can't really be understood as just an ideology. It is actually an offshoot of a bigger European political process, an ideology called settler colonialism. This is the same kind of framework that founded nations like the United States, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, just to name a couple. It's a type of colonialism that functions through the replacement of native populations with a settler society that eventually forms into its own identity and sovereignty. This replacement of native populations point is key. This often means the end goal being a complete genocide or a complete forced removal from their land. This is a little bit different from regular colonialism, because colonialism does have genocidal aspects to it, but it doesn't require it to function at its greatest. Colonialism sees outside forces coming into the colonized country to oppress and control it in order to extract its resources and labor. I think the British in India is probably the most known example of this. The goal of this isn't to create a new home for colonizers, but to just extract resources forcefully. This can turn into settler colonialism. Prime example is North America. There was an economic goal to colonize the Americas, but the main goal eventually turned into finding a new home for those fleeing religious persecution or wanting a new world. These settlers did not have an interest in economic gains, but to find a new home. The natives there did initially aid these settlers by showing them how to plant the crops and things, but these settlers soon found out that in order to find to found a new European nation in the Americas, that they had to remove the native population from their land. An ideology formed during this time that focused on racial purity and that natives were lesser and not equal to the Europeans, and that extermination was the only solution, as they felt that coexistence was impossible. This is the start of the formation of a settler identity that I mentioned in the definition of settler colonialism. The settlers start to see themselves as a distinct population and don't want to participate in the enrichment of Britain, but instead wanted their own nation. And of course, the Revolutionary War is the result of that. America, from its birth, is the definition of a settler colonial nation. We can think of all the words we use to describe American identity historically: the pioneer, the explorer, the frontiersman. These were ideas that were shaped by the taking of indigenous land. Some people try to frame the frontier and explorer nature of U.S. identity as people who wanted to see what was out there and explore the map and map the unknown. But in reality, the frontier was a war of extermination against the natives, taking land, wiping out entire tribes, and replacing them with settler colonies. This expansion defines America's identity, and we all know where it went from there. Continued genocide of natives, the replacement of those natives with Europeans, the enslavements of Africans to provide a workforce. We can think about manifest destiny especially. This is a key point. The idea that the Americans must push from sea to shining sea to create a great nation. And it was a perfect ideology to help drive the extermination of native populations, hiding behind a faux religious sentiment. And it seems like we're kind of framing settler colonialism as an understanding from the past, as everything I just said was very historical. In our definition, we define that settler colonialism requires the complete genocide to be fully complete. But no nation in the history of Earth has ever accomplished this. The natives are still around in America, much as they are in Canada and Australia, as much as the history books try to frame that they are mostly wiped out. They have had to consistently fight through impossible odds and are still to this day subjugated to extreme poverty and violence. You'll see news articles of tribes constantly having to fight the government to stop oil pipelines and other forms of extraction from their lands. And the conditions of these tribes are often impoverished, with drug use being extremely high. Keep in mind that you are literally living on stolen land, forcibly taken from natives of this country. These natives are still around, and these struggles have never stopped and will never stop as long as occupation continues. This is a bit off topic, but it's important to kind of keep this framework in mind as we transition into Israel and Palestine. Imperialism is another huge factor to understanding this history, but and honestly, like a lot of wars from World War I to the Ukraine War. But that's going to be a huge deep dive. We might go into that into a later week, depending on how I'm feeling. So, getting into the history of Palestine. The area we know as Palestine was held under Ottoman rule from the 1500s to 1917, with a brief stint of Egyptian rule in the 1800s. Ottoman rule started to turn colonial in the 1690s after multiple uprisings from the natives. Jumping forward, the Egyptians invaded in 1831 and took control of it for a few years, but their policies and their occupation was incredibly shaky, more than the Ottoman rule was. In 1840, the British took control from the Egyptians and handed Palestine back to the Ottomans, with the exchange here being securing European political interests in the region. After this, the Ottoman Empire went through a liberalization reform process, which affected the entire empire. What this meant for Palestine is it granted more freedom to Palestinian Christians, Jews, and Muslims. During this period, the project of Zionism started to take root. Jewish immigration into Ottoman Palestine happened in the 17th and 18th centuries, but this wasn't a mass immigration by any means. The first mass immigration of Jews to Palestine would occur from 1881 to 1903, and this immigration was largely a result of religious oppression and pogroms in places like Tsarist Russia and Yemen, for example. This mass immigration of Jews was able to purchase some land in Palestine for thousands of settlers for pretty cheap. This project didn't work well, and funding from the new Zionist movement was needed to maintain the project. And even with this funding, most of these Jewish settlers chose not to stay in Palestine. The land wasn't that great for farming, and they had no knowledge of the crops and how to plant them for the land. After this failure, a thinker named Theodor Herzl began advocating for a bigger Zionist project. And in 1897, the first Zionist Congress adopted a program called the Basel Program, named after where the Congress took place in Switzerland. This program stated that the goal of Zionism was to secure for the Jewish people a publicly recognized, legally assured homeland in Palestine. This Congress was wildly unpopular and opposed by both Orthodox and Reform Jews in Europe. Herzl himself was really secular and had a very kind of secular understanding of what he thought Zionism is and should be. This Congress also founded the Global Zionist Organization to pursue the goals of Zionism. People saw this conference as a fringe religious extremist kind of event, and tons of Jews around Europe protested it. The second mass immigration of Jews to Palestine occurred from 1905 to 1914. This is where tens of thousands of Jews would immigrate to Palestine in order to develop colonies and settlements. Zionism influenced some of these settlers to immigrate, but it overall wasn't a Zionist project. Again, religious persecution was a main cause for this. This immigration was a little bit more successful, with infrastructure being established that would help the Zionist project in the long run. The biggest of these infrastructures was the creation of the Bar Giora, which is a Jewish paramilitary force which would protect the settlers. Much of the function of this group was self-defense, but they also had an insurrectionary kind of separatist function. This paramilitary force adopted the motto, "In blood and fire, Judah fell, and in blood and fire, Judah will rise." This motto hints at the establishment of a Jewish state. In the earlier mass migrations, settlers worked with Arab watchmen for self-defense, but the Bar Giora had a separatist quality, saying that Jews needed to be defending Jews. The goal of Bar Giora overall was nationalist, and they thought that Jewish self-defense was the first step in founding a Jewish state in Palestine. So Zionism is not the dominant ideology at this point, but we can see separatists and nationalism start to gain prominence within the armed settlers during this period. So we're going to jump to the end of the First World War, where the Ottoman Empire collapsed. In 1917, the British issued the Balfour Declaration, which promised to establish a Jewish national homeland in Palestine. This declaration was signed by anti-Semitic British politicians who wanted Jews gone from Europe. The British took control over Palestine after the war and the Ottomans fell. This Balfour Declaration was a betrayal to the Palestinians because during the war, the British promised the Palestinians that they would let them establish an independent Palestine if they revolted against the Ottomans to aid the British, which they did. During this British period, Palestinians continued revolts constantly as they're kind of being oppressed by all these different nations consistently handing off their oppressor. Despite this conflict, the British period brought a bit of economic success and made it a lot easier for Zionists and Jews to immigrate into Palestine. The result of this being the total Jewish population going up from 11% to 31% between 1922 and 1947. During this time, more paramilitary forces started to develop in the Jewish settlements as revolts from the natives continued. We'll jump to after World War II now. After World War II, Britain was too weak to maintain all of its colonies and went to the UN to ask what should happen to the land of Palestine. And in 1947, the UN voted to split the territory into two states, one Jewish, one Arab. It's, of course, good to note that the Palestinians have had no say in this, as they have not had any say in anything else I've mentioned so far. This decision immediately sparked a civil war in the country, and as this kicked off, the Jewish People's Council declared the foundation of the State of Israel. So now we have official recognition of Israel being a state. A year later, in 1948, is when the Nakba occurred. The Nakba was an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians that displaced around 1 million Palestinians from their home. 15,000 Palestinians were killed by death squads. Cultural and religious sites like mosques were demolished, and towns were given Hebrew names. Around 400 Palestinian towns were completely depopulated and destroyed. By destroying these towns, Israeli settlers could rebuild their own towns on top of the demolished areas and give them different names. In 1956, Israel unsuccessfully invaded Egypt. This shows Israel's continued need to expand past the borders the UN gave them. In 1967, Israel launched airstrikes into Egypt after a land dispute, as well as aggressing on the Gaza Strip. This was the beginning of the Six-Day War, which saw Israel taking on Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. During this war, Israel continued to expand its territory, seizing the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. This also took control of Golan Heights, which was part of Syria. This result is the displacement of 300,000 more Palestinians from their homes. The first Intifada, or mass uprisings against the Israeli occupation, occurred from 1987 to 1994. The Gaza Strip and the West Bank would remain under Israeli control until the Oslo Accords of '94. What these Oslo Accords were was basically saw the Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and it was the creation of the Palestinian Authority. It's also good to note that the Oslo Accords were a direct result of continued uprisings and fighting back from the Palestinians. So, note here that as soon as the line was drawn by the UN to create two states, Israel was not willing to stay within these borders, as we saw by the Nakba and the Six-Day War. They instead focused on depopulating land and continuing to create more settlements on Palestinian land. The end goal of Zionism, like all settler colonial states, is to completely control all the land within the occupied zone. This is an ongoing process that will forever continue unless the native population is completely misplaced or if the occupation of the land ends. And violence is an everyday experience for Palestinians, and it has been since before Israel was a state, but especially after. So we're going to jump way up to modern day. There's a lot of stuff that happens in between, but I think it's better to just touch on the key points because there's a lot going on here when it comes to politics and stuff like that, and it's just way too much to dig into. So let's jump to 2008. In 2008, the Israeli government created a law named the Nation-State Law. This law declares that Israel is a Jewish state that upholds the right of self-determination to Jewish citizens alone. This denies self-determination to anyone who isn't Jewish. After declaring Israel a literal ethno-state, the state also says that it views Israeli settlements as a national value, which endorses taking land from Palestinians and claiming it for Israel. Again, no interest from Israel in a two-state solution, only an interest in the continued murder and land dispossession of Palestinians. The current Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu, who's been Prime Minister for about 15 years, has said in a quote, "The weak crumble, are slaughtered and erased from history, while the strong, for good or ill, survive." In 2015, Israel banned a romance novel which featured an Israeli and Arab mixed couple, stating that it insulted the identity and heritage of students. And to add on to this, Israel has actually de facto banned mixed marriages. This is done by marriages in Israel not going through the state, but rather through religious institutions, which means any Jew would have to get the blessing of an Orthodox rabbi, and someone like a Muslim would have to get a blessing from an imam. This basically makes it impossible for a Jew and an Arab to get married because of these religious differences and how hard it is to get a blessing in that way. This is one tactic that further segregates the Jewish and Palestinian populations. We'll get into some more of that right now, actually. So let's dig into Gaza, because this is the main area that is being talked about right now and the main area of contention. Gaza's population is around 2 million people, mostly refugees from villages that have been wiped out and replaced by Israeli settler colonies. Half of the people in Gaza are children, with the average age being 18. This is because of how bad the life expectancy of Palestinians in Gaza is. Gaza has a massive border wall surrounding it to avoid anyone going in or out. About half of the Gaza population has never been outside these walls in their life. Gaza could be correctly called an open-air prison or a concentration camp. The Israeli defense minister said last week that we are fighting human animals and will act accordingly. He said this as Israel cut off water, food supplies, and electricity to the Gaza Strip. Gaza has historically been the dumping ground for refugee Palestinians that lost their land and homes to settlers, and this has been happening constantly, starting from the Nakba through the 70s. It was basically a recycling bin for all the humans Israel has displaced in a tiny corner of their nation where they're out of sight. But Israel did not stop there. They also wanted Gaza. Until 2005, 40% of the territory in Gaza was home to 6,000 Israeli settlers. This means that 1.5 million Palestinians were allowed 60% of Gaza's land, and 40% of the land went to 6,000 people. The Palestinian land was also surrounded by settler roads and IDF soldiers who violently restrained Gazans to ensure the 6,000 settlers' convenience. The Palestinian resistance drove these settlers out of Gaza, and in 2005, Israel pulled out of Gaza as it was too expensive to maintain. So they pulled out all these settlers and proceeded to make life in Gaza an open-air prison that was blockaded from all sides, land, sea, and air. Millions of Gazans have been trapped within city limits for 16 years. This means that roughly half the population has never seen the outside of the barbed wire reinforced fences. In 2006, Israel gave Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank the ability to hold elections for the Palestinian Authority. This resulted in the immediate attempt to rig by the U.S., but this failed, resulting in Hamas winning. Yes, Hamas is the official representative of the Palestinian people in Gaza, not some fringe terrorist cell that the media insists it is. Hamas shifted from their anti-Semitic past in the 80s and into a more politically involved model that urged Palestinian liberation and anti-Zionism. Obviously, this was popular with the Palestinians, which resulted in them winning the election, despite all the foul play from the U.S. and Israeli governments. So now Hamas had the responsibility of governing, which honestly they didn't have much power in because Israel controls the water and food supply as well as who comes in or out of Gaza. The U.S. and the Palestinian Authority, which the Palestinian Authority is an Israel-backed governing body that opposed decolonization and fought for a two-state solution. So the U.S. and Palestinian Authority attempted a coup against Hamas, which again failed. Hamas has done its best to govern, but is basically shunned on any effort of diplomacy or negotiation by the Israeli state. Hamas's biggest policy was calling for a long-term truce in which violence would end for about 10 or 15 years and the siege on Gaza would end. Their theory being that this could clear the path for negotiations between them and the state down the line. Again, still kind of partying a two-state solution, but more in a way to just open up Gaza finally. Despite these proposals, Israel and their media apparatus continued to paint Hamas as a bloodthirsty terrorist cell out to kill every Jew and denied every outreach from Hamas. Hamas tried all they could with diplomacy and politics. In 2008, began the policy of repeated bombing runs on Gaza, which the Israeli government officially termed mowing the lawn. Remember that Gaza is home to surplus natives that have been run out of their villages and homes, half of which are children. Every time Palestinians would resist and fight back against the apartheid state, Israel would mow the lawn again and shell Gaza relentlessly to remind them to stay in line. This happened in 2008, 2012, 2014, 2021, and is currently happening as you are listening to this. Hamas turned more militant during this period since all other peaceful and diplomatic solutions have been tried and ignored by the Israeli state. I'm going to point to one specific thing that happened in 2018 for all the people who urge Hamas to go to nonviolence and that violence is never the solution. In 2018, the Great March of Return occurred. Essentially, this is a mobilization of tens of thousands of Gazans, including elderly and children. They would go out and do this every Friday for about a year. The people would dress in traditional clothing and sing native songs in a festival-type atmosphere to show that their spirit is alive and well in an attempt at peaceful protests. What did the Israeli government respond to this by? They sent snipers and gave orders to shoot these protesters. Over the course of a year, Israel murdered over 200 civilians, kneecapped and disabled more than 4,000 people. Did we hear about that in the media? Was the world sending prayers to Palestinians? Was every person posting the Palestinian flags to their IG stories? No, they weren't. Radio silence. I didn't even touch on the harassment of Palestinian Muslims and their holy sites during holidays like Ramadan. Constantly, mosques are being destroyed. People can't even practice their own religion. And to reiterate, Hamas's main goal right now is the liberation of the Palestinian people, and they aren't working alone. There are other bodies in Palestine and other groups. There's a Maoist and ML group working together on it. And this is the most unified front we've had for Palestinian resistance and maybe ever. So let's move into a little bit about current day, what's currently happening, and the media spin on this. So first thing, Palestinians do support Hamas. It is the number one shot they have at liberating themselves and taking back their homeland. I do not agree ideologically with Hamas. They still hold some radical values that are very nationalist. But again, who cares? Decolonization is the main objective here. Hamas are not out to kill every Jew. They're not out to come to America and bomb us. There's been media stories of there's been leaked documents that Hamas is planning a bombing in the UK or the US. Again, they are stuck in Gaza. They cannot leave.
Yeah, I don't know why they would do that.
I don't know. Palestinians get to decide what their government and society looks like after the decolonization, not some white dude from the US. Nonviolence does not work in the settler colonial setting. This has been proven time and time again by Nelson Mandela in South Africa and Frantz Fanon in Algeria. Again, Nelson Mandela has been whitewashed in media at this point, but he was a militant figure. There has been multiple times where the government would visit Mandela in prison and said they would let him go free if he denounced violence and denounced socialism. He never did this. Colonization can only be brought to an end by further violence from the opposing side, because violence is all these people know. It's all they've grown up with. Palestinians are subjected to this violence every day, whether it's bombing runs, a lack of food, or clean drinking water. The chance of their home being taken by a settler in the West Bank, I did not talk about this. The West Bank has a different kind of policy. They are not trapped in a prison. They are adopting a more live with Israeli models. Basically, what this means is Israelis can literally take Palestinians' homes. They can forcefully remove them, and the IDF will do nothing. They can do this by gunpoint. They can literally go in their house when they're away and claim it as theirs. The IDF will defend them in this. They could even shoot a Palestinian civilian and take their house, and the IDF will stand idly by. There's a whole Palestinian thing where people still own their house keys, but they can never return to these houses. So, Israel treats Palestinians as second-class citizens, less than humans, as you've seen through the quotes I've shared earlier and the history of the Nakba, the Six-Day War, and the siege in Gaza. All of this is why Hamas attacked on the 7th. They've expelled every possible option. The forceful taking back of land and decolonizing their homeland is the only solution. Now, this attack was extremely significant. It shows that Israel is not permanent, and this is the first time the colonized people of Palestine briefly took back some of their land. This evoked fear in the settlers, as we see in real time that the occupation is not permanent. Some of the first videos I saw on Saturday morning when I woke up was Israelis running to the airport to board their first flight back to, their upstate property in New York, or driving away in their $60,000 SUVs the second Palestinians did anything. This doesn't seem like a people that are spiritually attached to this land. This is a massive failure of the Israeli military and security force. Of course, killing civilians is never the solution. I obviously do condemn that, but at the same time, you know, who is your government to keep these people as second-class citizens and to put them into open-air prisons and cages for decades? And then this is what happens. This violence is a direct result of Israeli policy. Everything that happened since the Nakba to this point is a direct consequence of colonialization of the Palestinians and their further removal from their land. So that was what happened initially on the 7th. Immediately, media was in a frenzy and the circus had begun. I imagine this is what it felt like to live in 2003 as the invasion of Iraq happened, how to live, how it was on 9/12 after 9/11, because the media response to this has been nothing short of disgusting.
Yeah.
Immediately, propaganda popped up saying that Hamas was beheading babies, raping women, and just shooting about anybody they could. There are no claims to or supporting evidence to any of these stories. The beheaded baby story came from an IDF soldier saying that he thought that that happened to a news reporter, and then that got spread extremely quickly. People read that story, and even though it got debunked later, not as many people are going to see that. So this is now in the frame of consciousness that Hamas was beheading babies. Not true. Again, the taking of civilians as hostages. Again, it's not. War is ugly. This is how it happens. This is leverage. This is the only bit of leverage they can get. Again, when it came to like the forced raping of women and like just killing all these hostages, there's again no evidence for this. I have seen videos of Hamas literally taking the hostages to a hospital to be treated, but that's about all. So the media frenzy has been crazy about this, and it's amazing how quickly liberals jumped on the side of, oh yeah, this was horrible. They deserve to be wiped out. That being Hamas. But as we said earlier, when the media tries to frame Hamas as completely separate from the Palestinians, this is a mere excuse. This is like, again, it's like WMD. Like it's a completely made up narrative. Hamas does represent Palestinians. This is a armed front. This is decolonization. This is not a fringe terrorist group acting in their own right. I've honestly, we don't know the situation on the ground too much, but I'm sure Hamas and the Palestinian people have taken into account that as soon as they did this, the retaliation was going to be brutal. But this is the only way out of colonization. You cannot get out of colonization through any sort of diplomacy or anything. It has to come through further violence against your oppressor. So let's jump ahead a few days. Liberals are going crazy about beheaded babies that don't exist, and the media circus is calling for the shelling of Gaza. Netanyahu at this point said Gazans should evacuate the area as they are going to be shelling. Remember that Gaza is a prison. You cannot leave. There's nowhere for these people to go. So a couple days ago, they said that every Gazan should relocate to the south as they were going to do a bombing campaign on the north because that's where they thought Hamas was. So Gazans were like freaking out and running just to the south, not knowing what's happening or anything. Israel said to do this, and it is free passage to the south. But that didn't stop Israel from bombing these roads that were supposedly safe from civilians crossing back into South Gaza. Again, just blatant bombing of civilians. Apart from this, they've been leveling apartment buildings and schools and hospitals in Gaza. Anybody that doesn't get killed by this rubble doesn't have anywhere to go. They shut off the food and water supply. 90% of the water isn't even it's literally toxic. They've since then turned on the water supply again, but without electricity and all the rubble, it's not going to do much. Yeah, this is such, I hate this so much. So up until yesterday, the estimated totals so far are 2,800 Palestinians, including 800 children and 900 women killed by Israel. That's more than double the Israeli death toll. 1,200 Palestinians, including 500 children, are missing, suspected to be under rubble of these bombings. And that was what I had up until today. Today, the IDF bombed a hospital with zero notice. 500 people just gone immediately. Most of these people being children, remember? And what the media did, like immediately, there was a person that works on Netanyahu's kind of like social media branch. And the initial tweet he said about this was that Israeli Air Force struck a Hamas terrorist base inside of a hospital in Gaza. And they said that multiple terrorists are dead. He said it's heartbreaking that Hamas is launching rockets from hospitals, mosques, schools, and using civilians as human shields. And then said hashtag Hamas is ISIS. Again, this is all fake. This is complete justification for bombing a hospital. But the crazy part is they deleted this tweet. And 2 minutes later, they came back and said that Hamas did this, that it was a failed rocket attempt from inside the hospital, and that's how the hospital blew up. We have evidence of all of this as the media narrative spins before our very eyes. It's disgusting, and you can see through it, but again, people that aren't close to the ground in this are going to be completely but fooled by this. All it is manufacturing consent for further genociding of the Palestinian people. Yeah, the IDF have posted on their official Twitter fake footage showing that Hamas did indeed bomb their own hospital, but the footage was like from 3 years ago on an unrelated event. The media circus is just out in droves immediately on this. The misinformation will never stop as long as this goes on. And at this point, I feel like people need to wake up to this. Otherwise, you're just mindlessly being a drone for what is unequivocally the same as apartheid South Africa. If you were supporting Israel, you are literally supporting apartheid South Africa. Through all the things I've went through today, there's a lot more. I feel like this is just a way to get more context in the situation. But yeah, this has just been like the worst week I've had in a while. It's dreadful every time I go on social media. The first couple of days, just seeing Israeli flags in everybody's IG stories with like, these people have no idea what's going on. Like,
No.
They have no idea what they're supporting. It was just disgusting to see, and it will never change. This happened with Iraq. It happened with 9/11. It happened with all of these things. We have to learn to look at our media a little bit more. We need to dig in and learn these things ourselves because our government isn't going to do it for us. Another tweet from the Prime Minister of Israel today was, "This is a struggle between the children of light and the children of darkness, between humanity and the law of the jungle." They're blatant at this point. They're not even hiding it. Please, even if you don't care about any of this stuff, which you should, I feel like there's a moral obligation to at least care a little bit about a population being almost genocided at this point. This is an ethnic cleansing before our very eyes, and I don't say that lightly. This is something that needs to be, people need to look into this. They need to make sure they're on the right side of this. There have been protests, a lot of cities in America. Again, I don't know if anything will come to this. Israel is currently planning a ground invasion of Gaza. Funny enough, Blinken is like stalling on this. Like he's trying to do everything he can to stall this ground invasion, because if this ground invasion does happen, most likely Hezbollah will join this war and put an assault on Israel, opening another front, which could lead to Iran entering, which could lead to the U.S. officially entering the war. This would have two open fronts of war. Remember, the proxy war in Ukraine is still happening at this point. This is the closest we've ever been to World War III, besides maybe the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. So it's an ongoing situation. I don't know if I'm going to do like constant updates every week. It's not something I want to talk about too much, but what I will probably cover is decolonization theory, so we can better understand what's happening and what the process is. And I'll give some resources today, but I'll talk about imperialism. I'll talk about decolonization in further weeks. This will just help us understand a little bit better what's happening. But without that to say, the Palestinian people will be freed. It is inevitable. I think Israel is losing grasp in the world stage as they just continue to blatantly erase an entire population. Multiple bloodlines have already been erased in the past week. Every day it's something. I thought I was fully up to date for this, and then I look today and a hospital just gets bombed. And the response to it is just disgusting. So that's what I have. I do have a couple of resources if anybody is interested to dig a little deeper. For books, I have The 100 Years' War in Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. This is an amazing book. This takes all of it from a Palestinian perspective. I'm about halfway through it. Amazing book. Another one is Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. I've talked about this a couple of times on the show already. This is one of the best books ever written. I think this perfectly encapsulates the process of decolonization. It literally goes into mindset of the occupied and the occupier in context of Algeria and the French occupation of that. Really, really, really like priceless resource. Having read that book before this whole frenzy kicked off, it was incredibly easy for me to see what was happening. Just knowing about that book. And I think the Battle of Algiers, the film, is, some people have described it as literally like the visual form of Wretched of the Earth. I haven't seen it yet, but it's a good resource to kind of get a little bit more of an emotional connection into decolonization and its processes. We're talking about just people in general. Noah Colin from Blowback Pod. He's Jewish, and he's been very, very, very close to this Israel conflict for years. I think it's always good to include Jewish people when it comes to talking about this conflict, because again, the media will try to paint anything anti-Israel as anti-Semitic, which we went over again. The creation of Zionism was pretty secular and was widely opposed by Jews.
Yeah.
But Noah Colin's a fantastic resource. Hassan on Twitch has been doing God's work, honestly, by constantly streaming since this has happened, debunking all kinds of misinformation, doing history lessons constantly. If you're someone that just likes to have something on in the background as passive, that's good to have. It gives you a lot of talking points and debunks a lot of things. I know people have a lot of feelings about him because he is a very controversial figure for some reason, but he is a very, very valuable resource in this. A couple of podcasts. The Red Nation podcast is perfect for this. They are a communist Native American podcast I've been listening to for a while. Again, taking indigenous perspectives on these issues is really, really good because their mindsets are going to be completely different from what you'll usually hear. And then finally, Revolutionary Left Radio, fantastic resource. They have gone through the entire history of Israel and Palestine, gone through the entire Wretched of the Earth's book and related it to Palestine and current day struggles and stuff like that. So there's all your resources. I'm done. I don't know how to end this. It's not fun, I know, but like I don't know if I could live with myself without going through this on the podcast and trying to get it to literally anybody I can, because it feels so hopeless right now. But Palestinians will prevail. It's only a matter of time. History has showed this time and time again. And I will never forget the people who are going to switch up and go to the Palestinian side after being pro-Israel that day. I'm never going to forget it. I know it was going to happen. I know the history of how the media reacted, but it's still so shocking and like honestly just fills you with dread when you see it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I have. I guess racism was the theme of the podcast today.
Yeah. Didn't mean to be.
No, but, I mean, it worked a little bit better, so I didn't just like drop a bombshell out of nowhere. We were already kind of in the realm.
Yeah, definitely. Although I was, less prepared to talk about it than you were.
That's what I'm here for.
That's what you're here for. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's good. I think it's been, pretty rough to see all this, all the media spin. Like, you hear about it. Like,
Yeah, it's like we learn about it and we hear about it, but when it actually happens, it messes you up.
Yeah.
Like way more than you think it would.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing too, is that it's like it's so weird, and I wish I had that hope that you have. Even though you said you're hopeless, you still say that Palestine will prevail. I am maybe of the belief that Israel's going to wipe them out and nobody's going to do anything.
Honestly,
Yeah.
that's my belief. Like,
Yeah,
we've
I
been
mean, it's
sending
always
Israel
possible.
how much stuff for how long,
We just
and
sent them a
Gaza, like,
$1 billion aid
yeah,
package.
there's
Like,
they. I hate to say it, but I don't think Palestine really stands a chance.
well, you say that, but the Vietnamese kicked the Americans out with little to nothing.
Well, this is urban warfare, not
It is.
jungle, where you have Americans who don't even know what a jungle is.
It
So
is, but media is important, and the more that they
it's
blatantly do this, and the more that people
mm,
actively speak out against it, it's not completely hopeless.
I
There
mean,
are
yeah, it's not
countries on
impossible.
Palestinian sides. If this goes any further, we will see interventions from countries like Iran and Hezbollah. That's going to complicate things a lot. Israel, when they Hamas kind of scheduled this attack smartly because Israel has gone through like a lot of internal conflict in the past 10 months. There's been a lot of internal turmoil over the government going even more right wing and people not being happy about it. Israel is in its most disarray as it's ever been, and it's going pretty mask off. There is hope here. History shows that, you know, these colonies don't always last. Israel is not even 100 years old. It's not a permanent thing. Yeah, it's always good to hold that hope because otherwise you were kind of just walking around aimlessly.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. That's true. That's true. I just
it doesn't look good right
hopefully
now.
it doesn't look good, but
Yeah.
that it's good to hold out hope. And I'm glad you talked about it. I think it's one of the things that I'd be too scared to talk about. And I'm willing to, I don't know. I'm willing to be a little more risque than I think most people would be. But I think I don't want to be called an anti-Semite because I
Right.
think that Israel is bad. Because I am not. I I like I think it's I love the Jewish people. Like every single I don't know. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's just like it's just like I've met and I know a lot of Jewish people. Like my aunt is half Jewish, and like it's just in the family. Like I'm not Jewish myself. That's a whole thing, but that's a whole thing. But it's I don't want
And
to say
that's why it's important to know the context because
yeah.
if you know this, then it's easy to combat that talking point. And again, I don't think any religion, requires the occupation and genociding of a people to practice it properly. Everything
No.
about Judaism is like inherently contradictory to Zionism as an ideology.
Yeah,
It's literally a cover up. It's like manifest destiny.
it's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So
And it sucks because like it's such an irony because this is a people, meaning Jewish people, have been oppressed for so long in history, and for this fringe wing of it to gain statehood and claim that they are the Jewish state and then to do these atrocities to another people is really horrible. Like Zionism is probably the most anti-Semitic thing about this situation
yeah,
because it paints Jewish people, whether directly or indirectly, as part of this when it really isn't.
yeah, yeah. That's true. That's true. Well, yeah, I'm glad you talked about it. I was kind of, I mean, I kind of thought that you would, seeing
Yeah.
all this stuff happening. I'm like,
I
okay,
felt like I've been going insane the past week, so like I had to write all this down because I'm like, oh my god, I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm getting gaslit every time I go on Twitter. Like I know I'm right on this, and I know I'm very confident in my position on this, and it's like I'm not budging at all. So I need to write something down before my head explodes.
yeah. No, I think you did a good job. I think you did a good job compiling everything. Yeah,
I've done more academic writing outside of college
that's true.
than I've ever done in college. Or high school, for that matter.
That's true. You definitely use academic writing more than I do, and I had a degree where I wrote all the time.
Yeah.
So
I
don't
hate
write.
writing too.
yeah.
Well, to be fair, I can't write because I have tremors, so
Well,
I have a reason.
Stephen Hawking wrote, and he couldn't move his hands, so
I guess, but I don't have a thing I can. Oh yeah,
You're
he had
not
like a
really fancy.
computer
Yeah.
thing that I can't remember exactly.
he used he probably had someone transcribe it.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I don't know. He had like a
It's just
computer thing
get
on
a
his wheelchair that he
transcriber.
used to talk with that like voice thing, if I remember.
Well, yeah, that is true. That is true.
Oh, and I will put a direct relief fund thing in the description of this podcast, or Jerry will. I won't.
Send me the link, and I will
I
do
will
it.
send you the link.
Yes, we will do that. Of course. All right. Well, I guess that's the show.
That's it. I don't know how. There's no good ending for this. So.
There is no good ending. I don't know. Yeah, really, like this. It's been kind of a racy episode. Talking about art censorship and racism and imperialism. It's
Genocide.
yeah, it's just been rough. And I feel like you can kind of relate that to what I was talking about, especially with I Walked with a Zombie. A lot of legacy of slavery and imperialism of Africa in that one.
And like just painting native people as just less than
Yeah.
in every way possible.
I don't know if I did enough to say that the white people in this movie explicitly say that they are primitive and they are less than our beliefs. That is a thing that they say in the movie explicitly. And I think the movie wants you to agree because it was made in 1943.
Well, that was literally just the default position back then. And apparently not much has changed.
No, apparently not. So yeah, that is unfortunate. I don't know. I know I will talk about this more as this podcast continues. It's not going to be a part of this marathon, I don't think. I don't know anything about The Empty Man. That's one of the last movies that we're going to be doing. The Empty Man from 2020. I've heard it's one where it's it makes you question what's real, which I love movies like that. But I doubt that it talks about the history of racism. Us, maybe. I've heard it has more about society as a whole.
I want to watch Us. It just freaks me out too much.
It does. And the thing is that I already know the twist, so I don't like that. But yeah, the trailer for that movie freaked me out so much when that movie came out. I don't even know if I had seen Get Out at that point. I think it was one of those where I really want to see Get Out. Maybe I'll see as a new movie. And then that trailer came out. I'm like, no way. That is way too scary for me. But I think now it's okay, I can do it. Maybe. We'll see. We'll see. It'll power through. But yeah, that week, that's probably going to be the only one that's genuinely going to scare me, because The Witch is an A24 horror movie.
Oh, yeah.
And The Empty Man, I've heard, is more of a mindfuck thing. So.
The Empty Man sounds like a 2012 YouTube copy pasta.
It does.
Pasta,
it does. It sounds like an SCP.
It's like Slender Man ripoff.
You say SCP?
I did say SCP.
I had a lower binge in that years ago. It was very fun.
Well, doesn't The Empty Man sound like something like that?
Something.
SCP-298, The Empty Man.
Let's see if you got that right.
Well, I don't know if it exactly is.
It's the longest outro to a podcast.
Sorry.
No, 298 has something to do with the Holy Roman Empire and pipe organs.
Let's go.
Frick.
You were close.
I didn't think the number was going to be the real one. I just looked up The Empty Man. This is so off, whatever. It's a nice little button, I guess.
Yeah.
But The Empty Man it is directed and written by David Pryor, but it is co-written by David A. Pryor, who I do not think we have watched any of his hit films. I think the next time we do some sort of movie night, we will be watching one of his movies. I have it on DVD already. It is called Deadly Prey. It is a Rambo knockoff, but it is highly regarded in the bad movie community, and this guy is known for making terrible knockoff movies of real movies. Like, self-acclaimed, he would go to the movie theater with his brother, and then they would go home and write a script that is knocking off that movie. And so it is weird that he co-wrote The Empty Man, which is like a pretty well-reviewed movie, I think. So we'll see. We'll see in a couple weeks. That'll be the last week. But yeah, there you go. That's the end of the podcast. Watch Deadly Prey if you want to.
Would.
Or don't. I don't care. Okay, bye.